Did you know that President Taft had a bathtub built for him for 4 fully grown men? That is the first line of any book I remember. My lovely little Indian father, desperate to help me feel integrated into a society that wasn't his but would have to become mine, bought me a book on American presidents when I was 8 years old. Now, I'm not sure why he thought this would help plump little Indian me feel more at home in our community in Ohio, but I suppose it's the thought that counts. While I knew that our family was different, my name being Pooja, which means prayer, and taking little pieces of roti to lunch with me compared to my friends' peanut butter and jellies, I'd always felt at home in my stuff. I know this sounds rather materialistic, but I swear it's mostly sentimental. Growing up, I had Tinkerbell sheets, and I paired them with Tinkerbell flip-flops. And my house shoes were clear glass slippers that mimicked Cinderella's, helping me feel like a princess every day, and making my ankles bleed. When my parents weren't home, I played Barbie Dreamhouse, and I rearranged all of her couches and furniture, making space for all of her Barbie friends, while my real friends remained unmade. I lived in my toys, and for someone with no siblings, I kept myself quite entertained. It took longer to speak than most kids. My mom tells me a lot of the times my dad would go to the doctor and want to know if there was honestly something wrong with me. He always waited for me to speak. Now he no longer prays that, which is valid. It wasn't until I was given my first journal, a bright pink plastic number adorned with green flowers, that I understood the value of language. So I began to write. My writing was furious, and I looked forward to my journal every night. I scribbled my thoughts, I'd padlock it away, and I'd stash its plastic pink key above the kitchen cupboards when no one was home. Prying myself onto the counters, I'd hoist myself up, hoping, praying that my thoughts would rest quietly with the dust. Living in this pretty little world where I cycled through days in the first grade, second, third, each day coming home to write about gossip or which boys I liked, sorry mom, everything felt like heaven. Each year I got a bit taller, obviously never really that tall, and I'd hunt for a place to put the key, stashing it higher and higher into the depths of our house each year. One day after third grade, I came home. Little 7-year or 8-year-old me bouncing in my shoes to find my parents smiling over the trash can. In my dad's hand, he held a crumbled piece of paper that I knew held words that were my own. And he asked, "Roju rastava?" In our first language, my parents asked me if I write every day. My face grew hot, tears welled in my eyes, and I ran up the stairs, ashamed that anyone had read my work. Oh, how I should have locked it away, I thought to myself. Later that summer, my parents dropped me off in India to spend some quality time with my grandparents. Walking into the house, there were 2 rooms. The first one was my dad and his brother's childhood bedroom. In the second room sat a frail old woman. She sat, forehead pressed to the TV, a screen muffled with voices that she was still trying to hear as she went more and more deaf. Her glasses were the kind that must help you because they made her eyes look gigantic. Sitama, my great-grandmother. Sitama and I became close quickly. There was no room for pity when it came to her. She'd clank around the kitchen, determined to do the dishes and hold her own. But it was one afternoon during family nap time where I found her reading instead of watching TV. Since when could she read? No one had told me she could read. I knew then we'd be best friends. Turns out my great-grandmother taught herself how to read in the 3rd grade when her husband passed away, leaving her to raise 2 kids on her own. My grandparents told me of her story. She'd been married in her early teens, and she'd had 2 children before she was 15, pulled out of school in the 3rd grade. The 3rd grade. I was in the 3rd grade. My stomach twisted for the rest of the trip. Last year, I was offered a book deal. I was no longer an 8-year-old girl excited to write. That little version of me had disappeared. Instead, I spent my teens working on political campaigns, raising young women to run for office, constantly angry. I spent my days infuriated, and I no longer locked my journals because if someone could see my rage, at least then they could do something about it. Having educated myself on illiteracy around the world and child marriage, statistics weighed down my heart, and I was dedicated to ensure that no young woman would ever suffer the same fate my great-grandmother did. It weighed on me that my work had caused activist fatigue, and while I was honored with the chance to publish a novel, I knew they were going to ask me to write about politics. Have you ever considered writing about vampires? My little cousin posed this question to me minutes before my first publishing meeting. What? I don't know, just a suggestion. She shrugged her preteen shoulders. And then I remembered all I had to do was ask. So at the very start of my first editor call, I asked if I could write a book that I wanted to read. One that I wouldn't want to put down, filled with fantasy universes and characters who were sarcastic and nothing real except the lessons people chose to learn themselves. And my publisher said yes. I quickly started jotting down ideas, settling on one about cannibalistic witches because I thought it would be funny to write a book about people that ate people as someone who's never had meat. To make the process easier, moving myself from overthinking, I chose to write a fantasy novel from a 19-year-old boy's perspective, giving himself a chance to play with experiences of love in a way that my family's history of child marriage and arranged marriage never let me. And it was a blast. Every day I sat playing music, letting life take its course in front of me, letting these real moments inspire all the fake ones in my book. I wrote 70,000 words in 4 months. I was no longer angry. I am no longer angry. My writing was no longer weeping, was no longer stained with frustration, but rather it was filled with abundance as I let myself be creative again. My great-grandmother has held my book in her hands. Unable to read or speak English, she only knows that her name is written in my dedication on the very first page. When I gave this speech in the fall, she was 99 years old. She passed away over winter break. But because of her, I now speak 5 more languages. Just to ensure that she might, even though she may have never understood the extent to which everything I am is for her, I'll always be able to hear her stories in the recordings left on my phone. Our saddest truth, it says our saddest truth was that I cannot read what she writes and she cannot read what I write because we are both illiterate in each other's first languages. But my journals will always remain unlocked in her lap, metaphorically cremated with her, the idea that everything I am is for her. Whether it's the first page of my first book or the last page of the last book I will ever write, they will always be dedicated to her. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're a writer, I salute you. If you're not, then I ask you to try. Not just to talk about the sad days, but to talk about the good ones too. Maybe even the ones where nothing happened. When I first wrote this speech, we were at a bar and I asked everyone to grab the napkin in front of them before it was stained with wine, and Nina might kill me for saying this now, but if you use the tote bags in front of you, you can even jot down a word there. Just write how you feel today. And if you're bold enough, try to not lock away your thoughts in a plastic pink journal like I always did. Because I promise you, if you leave your writing open to the world, you'll learn who you are, who you want to be, and how you can live a life directed by love instead of anger. Thank you very much.